definitely a project that makes the 4-jaw chuck a nice tool. So this is a nice project for the lathe. You can do the entire thing on the lathe, although I did come over to the mill at the very end. And it's a good way to use the 4-jaw chuck too. Here I'm making a cube and a cube and a cube. I actually made the square, or this cube, this first cube, on the lathe using a 3-jaw chuck. Now I have it in the 4-jaw chuck, and I'm putting the holes at different depths to get the different cubes. So this one is ready. I'm going to drill out a little bit here, and then I'm going to use that starter to put the end mill to bottom out the that hole. Because this is a 4-jaw chuck, you can turn almost any shape you want. Works really well for square pieces. And here's my part right now. I have all of the first holes drilled. You can see that little cube inside. And now my 1/2-inch end mill that I'm using to do the second ones likes to steer off center. So I'm first starting it off with the drill, and then after that, after I have that on all 6 sides, I'm going to move up to the end mill to square it off. So getting the cube balanced, making sure it's in center, is a little bit difficult. Actually, right now it looks pretty good. The reason why I can get it consistently spinning true is because I've marked one of my jaws as my primary, and then the one below it, I know if I just loosen these two every time, then these two should stay in place. I'm noticing though I do have to make some adjustments most of the time, and normally you do that with an indicator, but I found a way to do that with my tool. This is the next side, and I'm going to check for true. I think that looks pretty good too. Maybe a little bit of wobble, but I think it's acceptable. So I'll go ahead and drill this. And I'm going to do this on all 6 sides until we've got it symmetrical. Every operation that I do will be symmetrical on the 6 faces. Now I have one more side to do right there, and we'll be ready to use the end mill. This is my flat 1/2-inch end mill, and that's what I'll be using to finish off these faces. And now we can take it out and check this first flat face in this other level. And that drill point definitely helped the end mill center nicely. Now we just need to do that on the other 5 sides. On this one, I can see there's a little bit of wobble when I spin it up. If you look at the top of the square, it bounces up and down, maybe 10 or 20 thousandths. So the first thing I'm going to try is loosen up these 2 sides again, and just make sure that this is properly seated against the other 2 jaws. And then I'm going to retighten that. And if it's still not square, then I can use my tool as a reference. May have helped a little bit, but I'm going to have to do this with my tool. So this is what I'm using instead of an indicator. I can see that my tool is touching right there. It's touching right there, which means on these other 2 sides, it should not be touching. It's just barely not, which means these 2 corners are high. So we need to pull this one back and tighten the other one. So this is the low side. I'm going to loosen it just a little bit and then tighten this side down. And now we can do this again. It's hitting there. I may have gone too far. Hitting there. Not there. maybe a little there. So I may have gone too far, but that's the method I'm using. And now I can check this again by spinning. And it definitely looks a lot more true. So I'm going to go ahead and plunge this. Now the second side's done. And it should have broken through to the first side that we did if we went to the right depth. And we can see there is a little bit between there. There is a burr in the way. What I'm going to do at the end, after I do all 6 of these, is just take the end mill and spin it there by hand a few times, and it'll get rid of the burrs. It works really well on the inner cube. And that way we'll be able to see, oh, there we go. I got the burr out a little better. That is our distance right there. The third side is always a little more exciting because that's when you can see your first corner. Second side, you can see your first edge, but on the third side, you can see your first corner. That time it was balanced on the first try. These are our 3 board sides, and there's our corner right up in there. When the end mill breaks through, you see these little burrs here that are created. They're like slices. And that's the same shape right there as the hole that's cut out in between the cubes. I'm watching my distance over here on the scale, and each of these are going to be 5/16 deep. After all that machining, the cube is certainly hot. Hard to hold, actually. But we have one more to go right there. Every time I'm feeding in and I get to the part where the end mill breaks through, you can feel a big pressure change with the pressure you have to put onto the knob. And that was our 6th face. And it's hotter than before. And we have all of the second cube done. I'm going to add one more layer, the 3/4 inch. But first I'm going to go in and deburr with this end mill here. That does a pretty good job of getting rid of those burrs. And now I can deburr these holes with a countersink that I actually made on the mill. It's not hardened steel, it's sort of a mild steel, so I can only use it on aluminum. So every time I get the opportunity with a hole on aluminum like this, I like to take it so I can use this countersink. For this last cube, I'm actually moving to the mill. I could do this on the lathe, but the end mill won't fit into my drill chuck here, and although I could use a boring bar, it'll be a lot faster and a lot more accurate if I do it here on the mill. So the entire thing is possible to do on the lathe, but I'm just, I guess, taking a shortcut here on the mill with my bigger end mill for this last part. I already have it centered, and now I'm going to feed down 3/16 from the top of my face on all 6 sides. This is the Z-stop I'm using here, and as long as I come down to that same point on all 6 sides, that should leave me with consistent diameter because I'm using the same end mill and consistent depth. It's always important that your setups are clean. Dirt and burrs will create problem in accuracy and seating. So I need to make sure everything's clean, and I'll set it up on a new side. Hole number 2. Look at this chip. There's these notches cut out. I think that's because as the tool came around, it was cutting, and every rotation there's a spot that's missing out of that surface. So that notch right there, the material that would be right there, was already removed from this side, and that's what gave the this pattern. I think that means whenever I'm cutting and there's more sides of the cube that are cut, you'll notice changes in the position of these notches. So when there's all 4 sides are cut, when we're making our last cut, I think we'll see 4 of these here instead of this spacing. The space can be 4 times less. And I think when we do it here on our 3rd side, because there's 2 sides, we should see 1, 2, and then a big space, 1, 2, and a big space. I hope that's what we see. That would be pretty cool to see these chip with patterns. This is our first edge, and we're ready to go for our first corner on this side. And it looks just like I predicted. You see we've got 2 notches in a large space, 2 notches in a large space, and that's because in our part we have 2 spaces already cut out, and that's where this pattern comes from. That is the last corner right there. Again, we're seeing the same chip pattern at the bottom because we've got 2 sides again that we're cutting against. These are our last 2 sides. Now we have 3 in a row right there. And on our last side, it should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, all consistently aligned in these holes here. Our last side. As I go down this last part, you will also be able to hear the chip pattern forming, a consistent 4 clicks as I'm cutting. And there we have it. These are all equally spaced, and it is 4 times exactly the distance, or 1/4 of the distance of our first chip. We have it. Taking a lot of material off this block, and now we have a cube and a cube and a cube and a cube. They're not independent from each other. If we wanted to make them so they rattle around, we'd have to go in here with a boring bar and sort of cut those corners off on all the sides. But I think this is cool just as it is, a static piece. And the last thing I need to do, of course, with every project, you got to deburr all the edges that you've cut.